Welcome, everybody, to the 87th AGM Educational Day. I'm very happy to be able to get started here this morning. We've got a bunch of different things going on, which we're hoping will blend together to make a very successful process. We have a young generation of ranchers that are coming in here now that are, a generation below where I'm at, and most of the people in this room. And we're very excited about that in the Nicola Valley because we kind of had this gap in the middle. If you look around, there's this kind of missing age link here about the 40-year-olds. They're kind of not in this industry because when they were just getting ready to transition into it, we get BSE, and they left. There's some of them are coming back, but there's a big demographic that's missing. So now we got the youngies coming up, Haley and Erica and Ian Lauder and all that. And we thought, well, how are we going to position them for the next, transition them into this ranching? Well, we need to think about what the long game is. The long game is 10 to 20 years from now, how do you want to be positioned to be successful in the cattle business? Land is expensive. Cattle are now expensive. There's regulatory issues. There's all these things. There's marketing trends have changed. There's country of origin labeling that'll come and go. There's all this stuff. So how do we position this young generation, and how do we, as an older, mid and older generations, get our mind wrapped around what we need to do to support these people? So we came up with an educational program that I think is going to address some of that. I'd like to just acknowledge that this is part of our tech transfer program with BCcattle. We're actually videoing this so that we can spread this conference out across the province in an attempt to use technology to reach people that aren't here, which I think is, kind of sets the stage for how we transition into the future. So that's very good, and I hope the techies happy with how we're going about things. Good, got the thumbs up on that one. And I think we're just going to sort of launch into it, but I just think we'll have some opening remarks from Mr. Bruce Vincent, who's a third-generation logger from Libby, Montana, has had some involvement in the cattle industry, I'm told, as well. He's had some very good speaking reviews from across Western Canada, and in fact, around the world, I believe. But not being as worldly as Bruce, I can't comment on that completely. And he's here to speak to us about the tools that we need to sustain our family ranches and operations for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So I'm going to get Bruce to come to the mic and make sure that he's happy, and then we will introduce our industry panel here this morning just before we start on that part. But Sherry Coppathorne, Dr. Murray Jelinski, Dr. Reynold Bergen, and Brett Stewart. So they're all here, and they're going to help us get through this information exchange. So please give it up for Bruce Vincent.
Thanks, it's great to be here. I'm going to get my rigging straightened around up here, and while I do that, I'll fill you in a little bit more on my background so you have a bit better idea what a logger from the nation that does everything wrong until we finally get it right. Why they have asked me to come here. That'll also let me get what I have in my belly back where it belongs. I don't know how many of you like to stand up in front of people and talk, but it makes me sick. And all the tricks they teach about how to do this and not have bile up against the back of your throat, I have not found a trick that works yet. I'm imagining all of you naked. And I don't know what that's doing to your stomach, but it's not settling mine, I can tell you that much. I am from Libby, Montana. Has anybody ever been to Libby, Montana? Awesome. Anybody been there on purpose? Tourism's our future. Yeehaw! It's a town near the Canadian border. As you can see, I'm always accused in the States of having a Canadian accent, and that's because we're closer to most our Canadian counterparts than we are our American counterparts. Our high school football team, baseball team, basketball team, we play each other, Kimberly, Fernie, and that's because of distance, and it's also because of culture. One of the reasons it makes sense to have somebody from the near north up here is because we share a number of things. Could you click? We share an ecosystem that is stunningly beautiful. Driving up here yesterday, I fell in love again with British Columbia, the Pacific Northwest, the places that we live in. We share a number of things besides just scenery. We share a number of animals. Those things don't know that there's a border between us. They cross back and forth. So do our people. If you're driving and if we didn't have the TSA border crossing now, the culture that is in Libby, Montana is very much like our sister city, which is Cranbrook. The same type of people moved into our areas. My town was started by some timber barons. And back in the old days, the practices that they used, they were pretty rough. But that was acceptable to the public. Not only acceptable, but expected. And the timber barons that started Libby, Montana, they actually began their careers 150 years before over in Maine. Whacked all the trees down in Maine, built Boston, moved to Michigan, whacked the trees down in Michigan and built Detroit, moved to Minnesota, whacked the trees down there and built Minneapolis, and then they looked across the prairie at the next patch of trees to move to, and the next patch was the Northern Rockies, northwestern Montana. So they loaded up the sawmill and the towns. They moved to Libby on the brand new Great Northern Railroad and started our community. My role in forestry was being a cutter, a sawyer. I'm the guy who whacks the tree down. Things have changed since then. We don't use the same practices as we used to. We're very mechanized, as you folks know. We have $1 million pieces of machinery. We have computerized technology now. Our folks, instead of out there humped over a stump like I was, they're sitting inside the $750,000 machine with joysticks, listening to Sirius radio and with air conditioning. It's lighter on the operator. It's also lighter on the ground. We operate not because we don't have anything else to do on Tuesday mornings. We operate because for the same reason that you folks do. People use the product that we're getting out of the environment. Our product is mostly household stuff. We do furniture and boards, and if the public was not consuming what we make, then we'd stop doing what we do. But the biggest change, besides technology in my culture, is about 70 years ago, the timber baron family noticed that there was not another place to go to. They looked across the Pacific Northwest. Someone else had already been doing the timber baron things across the Idaho and Washington, and the next stop was the Pacific Ocean. So we're very thankful that there was a family, the Niels family, that decided that we needed to start sustainable forestry practices. And instead of cutting and running, they tried to figure out what they could do to stay in one place. They developed some world-class forestry operations around Libby, Montana with a 200-year management plan. Though their plots of ground are still studied by the World Commission on Forestry. It's a very proud part of our history where I have a deep sense of stewardship and conservation, and it's in our community. That's one of the things that we share. Your deep sense of stewardship is also alive and well in our forest communities. When I graduated from high school in Libby, Montana, though I went to college in Portland, Oregon, and my deep sense of stewardship and conservation met a harsh reality. The kids I was going to college with didn't look at me as a steward. They looked at me as an axe-murdering Neanderthal. According to them, I was killing the cathedral forest. One of the summers when I was home murdering trees, I met my wife, PJ, which isn't entirely true. She wasn't my wife when I met her, although I tried that. I'd been in a logging camp a couple of weeks. I went to town, and there she was. She had a tube top and a tan, and I said, "You're my wife." She wasn't. She's a pretty strong-willed woman, and I'm still scarred from that stupid remark. We fell in love, got married, moved to Portland, Oregon to go to college together, and we learned that we had accidentally manufactured a child. And we learned that it took a lot more logging to go to school when there were 2 going on 3 of us. So we moved from Portland to Spokane. I enrolled at Gonzaga University. I enrolled there because it was 3.5 hours from home. I could go to school Monday through Thursday, and Friday, Saturday, Sunday, go home and log. On one of those weekends home, we accidentally manufactured another child. And PJ said, "Something has got to stop." So I quit school, because we got our priorities straight. Actually, we didn't quit either one very good. It was 10 years and 4 kids, but we made it through Gonzaga. We got a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, a Master's in Business Administration. We got a job in that city of about $250,000, and we were on our career ladder to yuppiedom. And one night we were watching the kids play out in the yard, and we noticed 2 really important things. They were playing inside a chain link fence inside a city. And to this day, we are perpetually pleased that there are about 300 million Americans that make the urban choice. But we stayed up all night and talked about what we wanted for us and what we wanted for our kids. We made what for us was a quality of life decision. We decided we wanted to raise our family in the luxury of the rural environment I grew up in. So it was February 1984 when we packed our crap in a U-Haul and we went back to Montana. We were the only loaded U-Haul going into Montana in February. But we joined the family logging company. The family logging company is very much like a family farm or a family ranch. When people think about forestry, they oftentimes think of Weyerhaeuser or Plum Creek or Boise Cascade, but 97% of my industry is just like animal agriculture. It's not the Cargills and ADMs. It's family operations that live in our rural communities that are the heartbeat of our industries, and that's the same in timber. Vincent Logging, our iteration of it, was started in the mid-'60s, and in the early days of our company, on weekends, us kids and mom would strap coveralls on and hand dad wrenches. The goal was to have the machinery operating Monday morning when dad hit the brush with the crew and mom hit the office attached to the house. They ultimately grew our company to include 65 employees. And in our town of 2,800, 65 is a big outfit. It is rural and it is isolated. A lot of the 65 were cousins. You know how that works. My dad once said, that's why rural people wave, because you just never know. Might be some DNA going by. Now, the 65 included their 4 boys. I am the second of 4 boys. We lost mom a while ago, and a couple of years ago we lost dad. It's now my wife PJ at my side as we try to figure out what we're going to hand to the next generation. In fact, while I'm here in British Columbia jacking my job, PJ is home in Montana doing my work for me. But she says it's no big deal. She does it while I'm there. She might as well do it while I'm gone. But if everything was okay at home, I wouldn't be in front of you. And believe me, everything's okay inside my home. But there are some things that have gone wrong in our timber communities, and it started south of the border. And in the old days, with my friends up in Canada, I used to say, watch what's going on down here, because you kind of lag 5 to 10 years. The insanity that's going on down there kind of perks its way north. It doesn't take 5 or 10 years anymore with social media. You guys are on track with us. So what happened down in the States in timber and what's going on down there in discussions of animal agriculture and other things is critically important. And what I'm here to do today is not tell you what to do, but to share some experiential knowledge from what we started with in timber, the nexus we met 30 years ago, and what we've learned in the last 30 years. And I'm hoping that there are some things in our journey that you can take away from so that you don't repeat our mistakes. And I want to talk with you a bit this morning about, that's the family. There are 11 grandkids now, and I have great hope for them if they'd like to live in either rural America or rural Canada. But something is wrong in our resource communities. And I want to talk with you a little bit about that this morning during the keynote, and then after the panel I'm going to do some wrap-up. First, I'd like to talk with you about where we are, and this is one guy's version of where we are in our rural areas. And it's not just rural America, it's not just rural Canada, it's all rural areas in industrialized countries. We're all facing the same kind of questions right now, and I want to cover that. I'm going to use timber as the genesis, the start of the discussion, because I know it best, and not because we're important, but because we were first. So I'll talk with you about where we are, how we got to where we're at, what we've got to do to make sure our ship doesn't turn upside down. And John, the gap that you're talking about is real. And if we keep our ship turned right side up, why the next generation of cattle in British Columbia have hopes of having a 150th anniversary of an education day in Merritt. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about why I have more hope now than I did when I first started speaking out. Where are we in our rural areas? We're having what I call a collision of visions. For the last 50 years, both of our societies have had two things that humans had never had before: time and money. And what have they been doing with their 2-week summer vacation? They've been blowing out of places like Vancouver and Montreal and Los Angeles and Chicago and Denver and coming out to our rural areas and communing with us. And what do you know? They're falling in love. They fall in love with the very things we love about living here. They think that the places you live in were actually gone. They get 200 channels on their satellite TV, and they've been told it's disappeared. We've destroyed the earth, and here it is, right outside their window. Clean air, clean water, abundant wildlife, the very things we expect outside of our door are things that they don't get to see until they come visit with us. And just like us, they fall in love. They fall in love with what they call the last best places. And who could argue with that? I believe we live in the last best places. They even fall in love with our culture. They have a stereotypical view of who we are. But I can tell you, if they're blowing through eastern Montana at 85 miles an hour and they see a cowboy, they will slide to a stop on the freeway. Oh, honey, look, a cowboy. What's he do? I have no idea, but do you see the hat? They fall in love with what they think we are. And then they go into our little communities and they see hardworking, hard-playing, community-oriented, school-oriented, church-oriented people that still live in our rural resource communities, and they thought that was gone too. And there it is. It's alive. And they fall in love. And then they have to go home. And when they leave with a desire, and it's a desire we all understand. It's a desire to protect. They want to save what they perceive to be the last best parts of both of our countries. So when they go back to their home in Chicago, they start fighting to protect us. They fight through regulatory reform, judicial activism, legislative activism, and they're imprinting their vision of protection on us. And sadly, their vision for the last best places has one fatal flaw. There's no provision in it for the last best people. And if they don't modify that, the very thing they want to protect is going to pay the price of their protection. And it's not because they're stupid or ill-willed. It's because they have no idea what's really going on in the environment. They have no idea the realities that you wrestle with every single day trying to provide food stuff for them. They're not stupid. They just have very little information. And Will Rogers was right. Sadly, the biggest thing that we share right now, by the way, is we only operate with this public body's consent. I call it a social license. They're the people that tell you whether or not you're going to continue to practice animal agriculture in British Columbia. Those are the people you get your social license to operate from. You have to have their consent to continue operating. And sadly, when they're working out whether or not we ought to have consent to operate, and they're fighting for policy that they can implement to save the last best places, there's a problem with the policy they clamor for. Because policy in both of our countries has nothing to do with reality. It has everything to do with the public's perception of reality. And when it comes to their perception, Will Rogers was right. He once said, it ain't what you don't know that's a problem, it's what you know that ain't so that's a problem. And the public body that wants to save our last best places knows precious little about the last best places. And timber, in our discussion down in the States, was the first to run into this collision. We have a beautiful forest that surrounds Libby, Montana, and it's paying the price of their protection. Our forests are being protected to death. This is a healthy forest. It looks very much like the forest around here, the forest around Cranbrook. That's the way people think it's looked forever and ever, amen. What they don't understand is that 15,000 years ago, where I lived didn't have a tree on it because there was a mile of ice. When the ice melted, the Native American population moved in maybe 30,000 years ago, and they started managing. They managed with fire. They burned my valley every 10 to 12 years. So when white man came, he saw a managed garden, essentially. It was an area that had been managed by humans for eons, and there were very few trees. There were 50 or 60 trees to the forested acre, big, thick bark tree without trees that survived the intermittent fire that they were lighting. But they haven't been managing for a while. We now have an overstocked forest. Can you see the red in this? Those red trees are dead trees, and I don't have to tell British Columbia about it because we live in the same forest ecotype. We've got lodgepole pine trees that are the first cover crop that nature puts out after a forest fire. They have heat-sensitive cones that pop open during fires. So for eons, we've had forests that grow for about 100 years, burn for a day, pop open the cones, grow for 100 years, burn for a day, pop open the cones. But since we're not managing, the Native Americans are not managing, we're not removing the fuel, we have an overstocked forest now that is disease-ridden with the northern pine beetle. It is not healthy. It looks like this for miles around my house. And now, instead of going out and managing the forest, removing that fuel and having it look like this, which is good habitat for grizzly bears and moose and elk and all the things we love, instead, and adding fire to the ecosystem so that we continue to remove the fuel, reintroduce a fire ecosystem like the Native Americans had for eons. Instead, we've got so much fuel that the fires are climbing up into the tops of the trees, not staying on the forest floor, but those are fuel ladders that allow the fire to climb up into the tree. And this is what it looks like now when nature is doing the managing. That's a bad day for the elk in the Bitterroot Valley. That's a bad day to try to sell postcards at our local shop. My industry's social license to operate was lost. And part of the reason that it was lost is because there are people that saved us to death. One of the first people to act in our area was a guy named Jasper Carlton with the Fund for Animals out of Boulder, Colorado. He phoned our forest manager, the U.S. Forest Service, up about 15 years ago, and he said, "I've got a vision. I'd like to see your area managed as an international peace park. Part in the U.S., part in Canada." He calls it Columbia Mountains. In order to achieve his vision, he said, "I'm going to file lawsuits under the Federal Endangered Species Act to stop managing the forest. I want nature to do the managing." His first lawsuit was representing the grizzly bear, which made me question his environmental credentials. I'm on the grizzly bear recovery team. I think it's awesome that we have grizzly bears. But if he's going to stop managing for the grizzly bear and we're going to let nature do the managing, a fundamental question needs to be asked. How fast can a grizzly bear run? And they can go 35 miles an hour in short spurts. Wildfires in the Rocky Mountains can burn as fast as the wind is blowing for as long as it blows. And then when their habitat is cinders, is that good for them? But was he really concerned about the grizzly bear, or did he just want to stop forest management? He wanted to stop forest management because he said, if that lawsuit doesn't stop all logging, I'm going to represent the bank-hugging monkey flower, the bastard flax, the Coeur d'Alene salamander, the northern caribou. He listed 12 lawsuits, 12 species, and it's a free country. He sued until the Forest Service stopped managing. We now don't have a sawmill in Libby, Montana for the first time in 120 years. Vincent Logging doesn't employ 65 other families. As I speak, we employ 0. We've maintained some of our logging equipment. If you come visit us this summer, you'll find it parked around my house. We've modified it to be firefighting equipment because nature is going to do the managing. And the last time nature managed our patch of terra firma was in 1910. The largest recorded fire in North American history started in Spokane, Washington on August 20th, 1910. A dry summer, very much like the one we're facing right now. 1,000 lightning strikes from one single storm. And then a Pacific front with 75-mile-an-hour winds blew those 1,000 fires into one great big fire that within 36 hours had blown across the panhandle of Idaho, through western Montana, and into British Columbia and Alberta. In 36 hours, 3 million acres went woof without filing an environmental impact statement. Burned the sucker to the ground. It was such a big fire that they called it the summer without a sun in Montreal because their orb, the sun, was orange until the snow flew. It was such a single carbon release event, they think it lowered the global temperature 0.5 degree. It was a big fire. And the American public was incensed. We're burning our treasure up, so we invented Smokey the Bear. We put lookouts on the mountains, and for 100 years when there's been a little puff of smoke, we've gone out and stomped on it. We were told we were saving the forest. But science for 50 years has told us the other side of that equation. We should have been letting these fires burn a little bit of the forest up a little bit at a time in a traveling mosaic, and now we've got a real problem. And the problem isn't what the public perceives. They perceive us to be almost out of trees. We're not. We have too many trees of the wrong size, of the wrong type, in the wrong place. And now when nature is doing the managing, it's managing it like it's never done before because we have an unnatural fuel load. And the fires that I just showed clips of, they're not burning like they used to. They're not popping open the cones of the lodgepole pine tree. They're incinerating the cones. They're not invigorating the topsoil like good low ground hugging fire can do. They're sterilizing the topsoil right down to bedrock. There are areas in the Bitterroot National Forest because of the fuel load that have burned so hot that the clay soils have been fired into ceramics. It'll take another ice age to pop that cap and grow our grandchildren's forest because we're pretending. There's got to be a better way. And now, south of the border, timber is not alone. Something is wrong in our mining communities when mining reform should be a promise of clean air, clean water, while we provide strategically important metals and minerals for a consuming public. And down in my country, mining reform is used as a bludgeoning device to drive mining companies out of places like Montana and into places like Peru and Venezuela. Something's wrong with grazing reform when it should be a promise of good forage, clean water for future ranching families, and instead is used as a bludgeoning device to drive ranchers out of places like Nevada and into places like Argentina and Bolivia. Something's wrong when professional resource managers have lost or abdicated their ability to manage to professional litigants whose agenda in court has more to do with greed, power, control, and social engineering than it does environmental stewardship. Something's wrong when the public has fallen in love with the environment, as they should, but they're willing to get important information on this important subject from such noted experts as Dr. Meryl Streep. The woman pretends for a living, but she was the first major Hollywood character to weigh in on this in the Alar issue. Do you remember that? It was a scientific joke in reality, but while the joke was working itself out, there were apple-growing families in the state of Washington, southern British Columbia, New York that were decimated. Dr. Woody Harrelson, have you seen him? Hanging from the Golden Gate Bridge, CNN was out there interviewing him on redwood forestry like he's an expert. He's a pot-smoking loon. And Dr. Ted Turner, just because he owned the stinking satellite at one time, that doesn't make him an expert on whatever bounces off of it. But when these folks spew their misinformation, disinformation, pseudoscience, half-truths at an unknowing public, and when the mainstream media prints that crap as the truth, that's what we base public policy on. And what kind of lens does society have to run this tsunami of information through to test it for truth? Is it your lens? The one that you got from the ground? No. They don't have that. They've got 50 years of Bambi under their belt. They think before you showed up in British Columbia, wolves were raising orphaned rabbits in a sea of old growth. They have no idea that in the real world, the wolf eats the rabbit and they don't have a party right after that. But they have been sold this Disney-esque ecotopia, this harmony and balance, beautiful green fields with a butterfly flitting in it, until at the 20-minute mark of every single Disney movie, what happens? The bad guy shows up. The anti-environmentalist, anti-harmony, anti-balance. And who's the bad guy? It's man. Man is icky. Nature's good. Man is evil. 50 years of that. They perfected the argument, by the way. During the World Trade Organization riots in downtown Seattle, did you guys watch that? That was a sad statement. The Rainforest Action Network from the University of Montana, like we got a lot of rainforests in Montana, as they were throwing a USA Today box through a Starbucks window, they proclaimed capitalism to be the biggest threat to our planet. That was a shock to every developing country in attendance. You get outside the rich borders of our two countries and reality smacks you in the face. The leading degrader of planet Earth is not profit, it's poverty. When poverty is driving some nations bust, the environment is way in the back behind food, clothing, shelter, the basic human rights. They're not debating view sheds in Zimbabwe. They're talking about food tomorrow night. And I'm afraid what my country could become is the biggest threat to the global environment through misguided lockup of our own. Because we want to consume. It's just production that sucks. We want things, but we don't want to make them ourselves. What we'd like to do is order raw products from developing countries that are long on resources, long on population, and short on cash, order the raw products from them, They'll use methods we quit using 30 years ago to send it to us, but because we don't have to look at production, we'll call it green. There's a thin line between environmental sensitivity and environmental insanity. And south of the border, we have crossed that line. When people want things like power, they love power. They want it to be immediate. They want it to be at every switch. They just don't like nuclear plants, coal plants, dams, or fighting the windmills because a bird might hit them. They just want power. They love roads. They like them to be wide and smooth and safe. They just don't like gravel crushing. They don't like asphalt plants. They just want a nice, smooth, clean, safe highway. They love things like food. They like it to be abundant. They like it to be pretty. They like it to be safe. It's just nutrient management, soil management, pesticide management. Those are the things they don't like. They love wood. My heavens, when our industry was crashing, commodity use of wood was at the highest level in history. People love wood. It's stumps that suck. How did we get so crazy? If we're going to figure out how to save our rural culture, we've got to figure out how we got here. And I go back to the 60s. How many of you guys remember the 1960s? Yeah, my generation has a problem. We might not have inhaled, but we ate the entire plate of brownies, and now we're in leadership. That's what happened. The most important thing that happened, though, is we got television. And we pushed the boob tube close enough to the dining room so we could watch Walter Cronkite while we ate. And for the first time in human history, you didn't have to live someplace to know what was happening there in real time. And I was a kid in Montana in the mid-'60s when that Cuyahoga River caught on fire and burned for a week through Cleveland. Do any of you remember that? I do. I wasn't very old, but I remember looking at the tube thinking rivers should not burn their bridges up. Maybe we should have a law against that. You didn't have to live in Ontario to know that the Great Lakes were dying because we got to see it every single night, fish swimming wrong side up. You didn't have to live in LA to know their air was turning purple. And then from the eyeballs of a humanoid in a spaceship almost to the moon, we got to see our little blue ball called Earth from a distance. It was kind of bobbing along in blackness. What happened in the 60s is we figured out we have one planet, we're only getting one planet, and some of the stuff we were doing to it needed to stop. We joined in factor and spirit, the environmental movement, a social movement designed to get laws on the books to take care of home. We empowered groups like the Sierra Club and Audubon and Wilderness Society. If a group didn't exist, we started one. I was a leader of the first Earth Day in Libby, Montana. We picked up crap in the creek going by the middle school. My family still calls me Mr. Green Jeans. A friend of mine, a logger's son from Vancouver Island, was getting his forest ecology doctorate from the University of British Columbia. He and a friend didn't like the fact that we were dropping atom bombs on the Bikini Atoll, so he and his friend started Greenpeace. And in the States, we got some major pieces of legislation designed to take care of home: the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, Wilderness Act, Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act. All good, well-intended laws. But the movement that we empowered, the laws and policy that came out of it, are 40, some going on 50 years old, and they are both showing their age. The movement we empowered is alive. The laws down there, they've been bastardized through regulatory regimes and judicial activism till they don't even resemble what they were supposed to be. The Endangered Species Act was to protect species from human-caused extirpation. Wasn't supposed to be a social engineering device for a lunatic in Boulder, Colorado to smear Libby, Montana off the map. And the movement, it is alive. The movement's in the education day at the BC Cattlemen and Merit. It's you guys learning every single day to do a little bit better job of providing for humans and taking care of the environment that you live in and love. It's every day is an Earth Day for a rancher. Have you guys had that bumper sticker? It's true. If you don't take care of where you live, you're the first to pay the price of the mistakes. So every single time you go to a class or a seminar and you learn to do a little bit better job, that's the real movement. In timber, we have every day's Earth Day for a logger. We also have Earth First. We'll log the rest of the planets later, but we don't wear that one as much. The movement's alive. It's in the practice. Think about what you're doing today on your operation and compare it to 30 or 40 years ago. Look how things have changed, how far you've come. That's the real environmental movement. It's our Ford EcoBoost engine. It's the hybrids that I was driving with on my way up here. It's the fact that Caterpillar got together with Shell and they now make an engine that if you park it in the Los Angeles air shed, the air going in is dirtier than the air coming out. That's the movement. It's doing a little bit better job every single day to take care of planet Earth while we provide for humanity. But the leadership of that movement, some of the national and international leadership of the movement, they learned some important lessons in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. They learned they could make a lot of money marketing just one product. And the product wasn't stewardship and conservation. The product they learned to sell was fear. They learned that they could scare people out of $20 a year if they just had the right message. And they turned what was a social movement into a conflict industry, an industry that is dependent upon crisis and problems. And they're still using the TV. Only it's not just TV now. Now it's our smartphone, our iPad, our computer screen. And this tsunami of information that's coming at people, they know how to use it. They know how to use it for marketing. And when they're using it, they go right back to the same format. They use visual backdrops. How many of you have seen the visual backdrops for the discussion of natural resource management? Visuals are important. 83% of what we remember comes through our eyeballs. So here we are looking at our iPad, and I know what the first 20-second soundbite's going to be if they want to discuss forestry. You know what the visual backdrop for forest discussion is? The world's butt ugliest clear cut. You can see the sucker from the moon. The last tree falling into a sea of stumps on Vancouver, that's forestry. And if they want to talk to somebody, who do they get? They get a knuckle-dragging Neanderthal from Oregon with snooze dribbling down his chin. He says, God, I like to make stumps. And he's wearing an Eat a Owl t-shirt. You've all seen the guy. Or they get a three-piece suit and tie from Weyerhaeuser, and in front of a 30-story building in downtown Seattle, he says, America wants wood fiber, and by God, we provide it. That's our 20 seconds. The guy who doesn't like us, what do they get? They get a babbling brook with a pristine mountain scene and with the flag in one hand and bald eagle in the other. They say, all I want is clean air and water for my children. Then they point out that everybody in that last soundbite are greedy corporate bastards intent on profit alone. And that's the end of the newscast. And America gets to pick. And every resource industry is treated the same. What a banner week it is right now to discuss oil development, because if you ask a fifth grader in America what oil looks like, they'll begin discussing dead black birds in the dead black ocean. That's oil. And the guy who doesn't like it stands in front of the Everglades with a flag in one hand, bald eagle in the other. Mining, they'll go to Butte, Montana, one of the worst mistakes we've ever made, dead birds bobbing in a settling pond. The mistakes were made 100 years ago, but it doesn't matter. That's mining. And the guy who doesn't like it, flag in one hand, bald eagle in the other. Agriculture, during the World Trade Organization riots, as they showed domestic agriculture, every single time they discussed it, they showed a crop duster. Production agriculture is the application of chemicals. And the guy who doesn't like it stands by the little Des Moines River. And animal agriculture, what do you guys get? How many of you have seen that black and white spotted cow someplace in Northern California with a forklift through the side getting drugged through 6 inches of manure? That's animal agriculture. And the guy who doesn't like it is Wayne Pacelli with the Humane Society, and he's petting a puppy, and all he wants to do is save the puppy. And when we see that crap, we get mad. Because those aren't the choices. That's preserve or destroy. Providing for humankind, conservation, stewardship is in between those extremes. But neither one of our countries has a society that understands that anymore. They are 4 generations from the farm. They don't have grandma's place in Manitoba to go back to during the summer and watch the cow eat and poop and make milk. They don't have that. And we've laughed at them. How many of you have ever said the stupid people in the city think milk comes from a carton at Safeway? Timber industry, we say those stupid people in Seattle think boards just show up at Home Depot. And on sale day, a bunch of boards show up. In fact, we've been kind of haughty about that because we don't believe we have many legs up on our urban cousins, but we know where their stuff comes from. But their lack of information is no longer laughable. It's a fertile marketplace for people that are marketing fear because they're good, reasonable people trying to make very tough decisions on a very complex issue. And what we need to do is put ourselves in their shoes for a minute. If you were them, what would you choose between the two choices? Put yourself in someone's shoes that lives in a downtown high-rise in Vancouver. If you were them and you lived on the 30th floor and you had one functioning brain cell, you would move. No, that's not nice. Thankfully, they like to live there, but the people of Canada that give you your social license to operate, they're not stupid. They're very rightfully concerned about the environment that you are helping them manage. But if you were them and you thought the two choices were preserve or destroy, which one would you pick? You would never pick the forklift through the side of the cow. They did not pick the clear cut. And we lost our social license. And that illuminates our issue. How did we get to where we're at? The real enemy is not these groups that are dependent on conflict. They're doing their own thing. They're pursuing the almighty dollar. God bless them. Our problem is they can sell that crap. And if we want to fix things, we've got to address the real enemy, and that's ignorance. And the most important thing I want to get across today, and I'll finish it up in the wrap-up after the panel, is discerning the difference between fighting and leading. Because we fought and fought and fought, and we finally figured out that we needed to lead the discussion. And in forestry, we learned some really important things. Did not learn how to make this go. I'm not going to go into it right now, but we developed a vision document finally. We listened to the public. Instead of standing on street corners and screaming our truth at them, we started asking them, what do you want to know? We found out that they wanted a healthy forest. Well, what do you know? We can help them get there. We developed a vision document for 100 and 200 years from now, and George Bush signed into law the most progressive forest legislation in our country since Teddy Roosevelt. And it has nothing to do with commodities. It has everything to do with protecting the environment, having a healthy forest. And it's the light at the end of our tunnel. Because we completely lost our social license, it will take us a while to get it back and implement the Healthy Forest Initiative, but it is a light at the end of our tunnel. But that light is a train coming at you. Because the forest industries now, the forest discussion is not as good at producing piñata for the conflict industry as it used to be. We made them billions, and they need a new marketplace. And it's been clear to me for the last 10 years, the next marketplace for the conflict industry is anything that has to do with water and anything that has to do with animals. That's you guys. So you're in the crosshairs. What can you do? You can learn to lead. We learned 3 truths the hard way. Truth number 1 that we learned, democracy works, but it's not a spectator sport. Is your member of parliament still here? It works. It's the best system ever designed by humans for bloodless revolution. Look at our country. Swing this way, swing that way, and not one shot fired. Rock and roll, it works. But in order for it to work, we've got to engage in it. That means we have to make it work for us. That means we have to be registered to vote. We have to be voting. We have to tell our friends who's standing for our interests. We have to support people that support us. How many of you have ever had somebody running for office, their name on your bumper? Seriously, raise your hand. How many of you expect when you send that man to Ottawa that he takes courageous stands for agriculture, animal agriculture? If we don't have the guts to put their name on our bumper, how can we have the gall to ask them to stand out on a political limb with the illumination of the media? If we don't stand with them, they won't stand for us. So we've got to learn how to make the democratic process work. That means finding leaders that understand our issues and then supporting them through the process. Second thing we learned is that when people lead, leaders follow. The leaders in Ottawa or Victoria are no different than the rest of society. 4 generations from the farm. They have no resource linkage. They're trying to figure out animal welfare. And if you can't tell them that there's a choice between forklift in the side and petting a puppy, they're never going to go with forklift in the side. You've got to define to them what animal agriculture, what animal welfare really looks like. You've got to whisper in their ear about how those are false choices. There are choices in between. They're no different than the rest of society. So stake your ground out in a position that you can live with, that you can manage for, and then drive to it. The final truth we learned is the world is run by those who show up. Meetings held every day talking about the future of animal agriculture in Canada, and you can complain about those that show up like religious zealots and throw rocks at you, or you can plop your butt down next to them and compare visions, because they are going to show up. And it doesn't mean you have to show up and take or compromise your business. What it means is showing up in little things like when your leaders of BCcattle say we've got an issue going on in Victoria and you need to be there, it means being there. It means sending an email to your representative. It means going to your conservation board meeting. It means going into a classroom and talking to kids, showing up in the discussion. At stake in this is your social license to operate. I can tell you from my history that if you lose it, you're in trouble and it will take a long time to gain it back. And both the heritage and promise of your ag culture is at stake. And I'm going to close this portion of my presentation, and then we'll listen to the panel, and I'm going to close with some ideas and then tell you why I have more hope than I used to. As you're listening to the panel, and as you go out and try to hit the street and do something after your education session this morning, I'd like you to remember why. Why are you in this? And I heard, where's John? I heard you talk about the next generation. We're missing one because of BSE. The next generation is, here they are, and what's it going to look like in 50 or 100 years for you folks? What keeps a fire in my belly going is not the fact that maybe if I work really hard, the timber industry will be doing fine. Industry, capital I industry, is going to do fine somewhere. Because when there are 11 billion people on Earth wanting stuff, somebody's going to provide it. That isn't the question. Are we going to manipulate the environment for the good of humankind? The question is who's going to, where are they going to, and how are they going to? The question isn't are we going to have animal agriculture in the world? We're going to. The question is are we going to have it in British Columbia? Or are we going to have it in Montana? What's at stake in this discussion is not industry. If that's what I was fighting for, I would have quit 20 years ago. They're going to be fine. What's at stake is the little I, the culture of industry, the people that inhabit these mythical flowcharts. And when my butt gets tired and I'm driving to another place to jack my jaw, I have to remember why. And for me, he's why. One of the reasons that there is a gap is because there is also a message sent to people for several generations. That message my dad heard in our little timber town in the mid-'60s in Libby, Montana. We take a test in the States called the Iowa Basics Test to tell how smart or dumb you are. You take it in the 3rd grade, and when the principal and teacher got our results back, they called mom and dad into school. And I laid awake waiting for him to get home that night because when dad gets called by the principal, life as you know, it's about to come to a screaming halt. So I was wide awake. Dad didn't know for 30 years that I overheard the conversation, but we lived in a trailer at that time, had little thin walls. I heard every single word, and what they talked about was how to keep me from being a logger. Because my dad had been told that night in our little timber town that if I ended up being a logger, it was his fault. And for the first time in that proud man's life, instead of looking down at his hands and seeing calluses on his palms and dirt under his fingernails and that being a source of pride because it built our company, it built our town, it built our state, it built our bloody nation. For the first time in his life, it was a source of shame and guilt. He got the message. Millions of resource rural workers like him got the message. I had scored high on the Iowa Basics test. And the message he got was that I was going to be too smart to be a dumb old logger like him. And he wrapped that misplaced mantle of guilt around his neck and wore it for decades. For the first time in his life, he didn't have a heritage worthy of passing on, at least to intelligent children. We put him in the ground a couple years ago, and I pray the mantle was gone when we did. Because I got to work with him for 40 years, and I can tell you, when we were standing out in the forest, looking at a hillside of trees, trying to figure out how to apply modern forest management to the hillside, I had 2 degrees hanging on the wall. Dad didn't have a 1, and there was a stupid person standing there, and it was not my father. He had more sustainable environmental information in his brain that came to him through his hands than he could have gotten with a doctorate degree from Yale. But his was experiential. He learned by doing. And for some reason, society has decided to discount that knowledge base. They continued the discount at their own peril. I am a huge believer in higher education. I have 4 children. They've all completed college. But when they leave the university system, they understand all the theory taught at university is just theory. And it floats around in na-na land until some real person takes it to the real world and tries to apply it with their real hands. What's at stake in this discussion is the laboratory of application. That's what I see looking out here. You are the appliers of science. You're the people that actually move the ball forward if we want to be green. We want to do a little bit better job. And what's going to happen to our environment and our culture if the leading export of our rural areas is our young, well-educated, well-rounded children? We're going to end up with Scary Larry and his idiot brother in a 1952 John Deere tractor doing what? We need our smart kids back. In our farms, in our fields, in our forests, it's going to take really creative kids doing really creative things to feed and clothe 11 billion people and save the earth. And for me, that's what the discussion is about. We have a hill to climb. You have a hill to climb. Your social license to operate is on the table of debate as we speak. The public is looking it over. The truth has been outrun by lies for so long they don't recognize the truth. And we, together, have got to learn how to lead this discussion. What the public needs in order to maintain your social license, and what John was just talking about, opening your doors, if you want to engage the public in a discussion about the future of sustainable beef in British Columbia, the public needs three things. They need the truth, warts, pimples, and all. The folks, the conflict industry that are telling half-truths or sharing misinformation, they can get by with that. You cannot. Absolutely truthful, even if it's ugly. And by the way, one of the truths is you're only as good in today's modern age of social media as your worst operator. So the truth is you've got some problems out there, and you know you've got some problems, just like I do in the timber industry. But the public, you need to share it with them, warts, pimples, and all. Then they need to trust. And they don't trust industry. They do not trust capital I industry talking head on the evening news. They trust people over the backyard fence. They trust people at their local Rotary Club. They trust people in their church. They trust people that they've known for 30 or 40 years or would like to know. And lucky for ranching, most of the public would like to know you. That's why they do primetime television shows now on the Discovery Channel. It's because the public still has this romantic notion of who you are, and they want to trust you. They cannot find you in a lie. And you've got to then have transparency because they'd like the truth that you've shared with them to be verifiable. And if they can't attend in person, then they want someone that they trust to attend. What might help? So I'm going to leave you with this. What does help look like? Looks like humanizing, empathizing, and educating, localizing and leading, and participating. What does humanizing mean? It means that it's too easy to vilify industry. The public does not trust industry. It's normal to not trust them, and we've got to quit bitching about it and just get on with our business. It's a reality right now. They do not trust industry. What they do trust are people. They trust their neighbors. And if you're going to talk to the public, if you're going to discuss this with them, you've got to humanize the issue. I heard a lot of science up here. Science is really good, but if you can't package it in a way that emotionally makes sense to them, it's garbage. It doesn't help. And the engagement when we're sharing that with them has got to be shared by humans that they trust. Rural cultures need a trusted ambassador, and that's you. They need that face. And the new backyard fence, by the way, is social media. People are building community online, pushing a button, talking to 10,000 people. It is the new backyard. We've got to learn how to use it. After we humanize it and understand we've got to be the ambassador for this message, we've then got to empathize. Before you can educate somebody, you've got to let them know that you've heard their concerns, real or not. You understand or maybe even share their concerns. And your message has got to be, I am listening, I understand, I respect or share your concerns, and I'm part of the answer to your problems. When you define BC beef as part of the answer to their food safety problems, animal welfare problems, when you define yourself as part of their answer, you've got a sustainable future. But if you can't define yourself and your practices as part of their perceived question or problem, they're going to ultimately write you out. You have to, and believe me, I used to think education was the key. Education is, but first we've got to empathize. In the timber industry, we spent a lot of time playing what I call reverse Jeopardy, because we did have the truth. So we stood on street corners and we shouted it at people. We played what I call reverse Jeopardy because we were answering all the questions the public wasn't asking. We were telling them what we demanded they know instead of asking them, what do you want to know? We were answering our questions and not theirs. So we've got to empathize, listen, be non-judgmental. They're not stupid people. They're very smart, trying to be green. Be their green answer. Then you can educate, and don't play reverse jeopardy. Listen, identify the individual or societal questions or needs, and then communicate those answers to them in English. Be the leader of their solution process. And then lead locally. You can get lost in the trees. The young man that asked the question about, do we need to change education? Yes, we do. But before we start worrying about education nationally or even provincially, look at the education at home like Sherry's going to do. You're going to go home and you're going to talk to a teacher. You need to watch what's going on in your local area because your local folks, your local business peers, your local teachers need to be ambassadors for your truth. So localize it, localize business. How many of you belong to your local Chamber of Commerce? Good for you. How many of you have bitched about the local Chamber of Commerce? Because all they do is promote tourism. They're promoting business interests. They are your business peers. You don't have a shingle on Main Street, but go to the meeting, belong to the Chamber of Commerce. They're who helped us get our Healthy Forest Initiative passed nationally. Our local chamber from Libby helped lead the charge. Local civic group, local schools. And finally, participate. We thought that our associations could do this hard lifting for us. We finally learned that we had to add activism as a line item in our business plan. We finally put it right in front of equipment maintenance, and we don't take it out of social life, family life, church life. It's part of doing business. And activism doesn't sound like fun. I remember the first time I told Dad we had to become activists, the look I got was the one I just got from you. 1 hour a week of doing something to advocate for your culture and your industry. And if we all do that, there's every reason to have hope. How many of you are concerned with the urban people moving out and buying their 20-acre piece of British Columbia? How many of you treat them like the enemy until the week after they're dead? Yeah. What did we used to do in the old? Do you know why they're coming, by the way? Because you live in the last best parts of the world. The same reason they're coming out here to buy their 28-acre piece of Mecca is why you like living here. And can you stop them? No, so they're coming. And we treat them like the enemy until they become the enemy. They gather in these little peer groups of themselves, sharing the misinformation amongst each other in an echo chamber, and they become the enemy. In the old days, when new people came to town, what'd we do? It was new blood, new money. Somebody assigns a cousin to marry our daughter. We met him with a pie. Hey, thanks for coming. I encourage you guys in rural BC Cattlemen, to meet the new people and greet them. Tell them, I know why you came. It's the same reason we love it here. And this is what made it the way it is. Warts, pimples, and all. Turn them into friends before they become enemies. Work on a welcome wagon. One of the ways to do that is to celebrate Earth Day. If you're going to lead the green discussion, take that week over. Look what you've got, the progress you've made during every year during Earth Week. And I've pounded on the forest industry to do this. I asked Louisiana Pacific about 15 years ago, do you guys spend any money on Earth Day? They said, yeah, a lot. I said, on what? They said, increased security. You know, maybe we ought to, during that week, engage the public with our concerns, being empathetic to their perceived problems, and once a week celebrating how we're answering their questions. Society is tired of the doom and gloom, bongo drum beating, incense burning, planet is dying crap that they have been getting for decades. They're exhausted by it. They're tired of hearing what's wrong and ready to start hearing about what can be right. They will not, they should not, endorse an anti-environment, anti-green message or leader. But they want a new leader of this discussion that addresses their concerns. And I know it because of my speaking. It used to be just the choir. I'd travel around talking to us. For the last 10 years, it's been the American Banking Association, the municipalities of British Columbia, the National Association of Counties in America. People are trying to figure this stuff out, and they want a real human to discuss real truths with them. They're starving for it. Particularly the next generation, the one that you're worried about entertaining, joining your industry. I got a call a couple of years ago from the University of Illinois. Student president asked me if I would come talk to them on Earth Day, and I thought, you want a logger on Earth Day? You're looking for somebody to kill. But I said I'd go, and I went. 3,000 kids in the auditorium. They'd looked me up on the internet. Picketers in the back of the room called me some pretty fun names. But I talked about the same thing we just talked about. Talked about the old environmental movement being timely and necessary, but failing to mature beyond a 3-word vision of stop doing that. And when they were sharing planet Earth with 9 to 11 billion other souls, stop doing that wasn't going to cut it. We need a new environmental vision built on hope instead of fear, science instead of emotion, education instead of litigation, resolution instead of conflict, and employing rather than destroying human resources. And the new movements can be led by rural people because we live too close to the ground to pretend. And I sat down, and it still gives me goosebumps because the kids stood up and they clapped and they stomped and they whistled and they escorted the picketers out of the back of the room. And I asked the student president, what happened? Because I told him, I thought my job here today was to get tomatoed off stage. His direct quote was, we're tired of hearing that the planet your generation is handing us is a piece of crap. You gave us hope. The next stop was Dartmouth. Same reaction. The next stop was Brown, Ted Turner's alma mater, not a bastion of conservative thought. Same reaction from the kids. And now I do a nationwide, in both of our nations, by the way, campus speaking circuit. At the request of kids, they are starving for a message that they can buy into that is pro-environment, pro-green, and also pro-human. The Sustainable Roundtable, they want us engaged in that kind of stuff. It answers their concerns, and they're starving for somebody to deliver the message to them. That gives me hope. What I ask you to do is go home after this meeting and focus on something that you can do. Nobody's going to do it for you. It needs to be part of doing business, a line item in your business plan for activism. 1 hour a week, doing something. I have a tendency to try to eat elephants when I see them in the room, so when Mom checked out, she gave me this, and it's dog ear because I have to read it all the time. And I leave you with this. It is from numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. That was Bobby Kennedy, South Africa, 1966. It's also the BC Cattlemen, Merit, 2015. You don't have to go home trying to be a wave. Your job is to keep your ranch profitable and operating. But you have got to go home committed to being a ripple, doing something. The public is ready. There's a way to save the last best places. It's just going to take the last best people working on it together to give them that answer. And this logger from Libby, Montana couldn't be prouder to stand with you. God bless.
Well, I'm inspired, and I'm really grateful that we had this opportunity to have Bruce, this panel, this full room, live in the last best place, doing the thing that we love to do with the people that we like to do it with.